What's up, everybody? It's Soren Baker here on Unique Access Entertainment. As always, please hit that subscribe button. It's right down there and it's free. That enables us to keep coming to y'all as often as possible with as many interviews as possible, as many episodes of The Great Debaters as possible, and as many episodes of the 1st and 15th as possible. So please hit that subscribe button, like our content, share, talk about it, be about it, each one, teach one, and we appreciate your support and getting us this far. And if you're watching the 1st and 15th, I'd also encourage you to please join us as a member. That enables us to get these videos to you as often as possible as well. And when you join as a member, you get the videos early, ahead of time, before they go up live on the normal channel. And I want to send a special shout out to our first 3 members who have joined Unique Access on the membership platform right down there in that join button: Davida Chanel, Calvin Williams, and Alberta Baker. Thank you so much for helping us in that way and enabling me to spread the wealth literally and figuratively with my good friends and colleagues at Unique Access. Now, today on the 1st and 15th, we are going to be talking about What-Ifs Part 2. Now, some people saw the original video and we got so much feedback on it that I figured I'd do a Part 2 of it relatively quickly here on the 1st and 15th, because part 1, man, you guys were on fire in the comments. So, I was talking about Schoolie D, talking about Ice-T, talking about Twister, talking about all kinds of people, Jay-Z, etc. So with this episode, I wanted to take some of your comments, mention them, and then talk about some of the things that could have or might have happened had these things come about. Now, originally, Nelly was talking about the D.O.C. and how he was the biggest what if, and that's an accident, D.O.C. losing his voice. So I picked through these comments from the first episode of this What Ifs, situations of things that didn't have to do with a death or a murder or an accident or somebody getting hurt. I choose to focus on situations that could have happened if people have made different decisions, whether that's musically, creatively, business-wise, signing with a different label, what have you. So without that explanation getting any more detailed, we are going to move on to our first what if. This one comes from Son of a Beach 71, so thank you for that one. What if Slick Rick and Dougie Fresh had done an actual album together? Man, that would have been amazing. I would imagine that this would have come out in 1986 or 1987. It would have come out before both Dougie Fresh and the Get Fresh Crew's The World's Greatest Entertainer, my favorite album of his, probably before Oh My God, the album that preceded it. And then also, of course, before, I would imagine, The Great Adventures of Slick Rick, one of the most acclaimed albums and one of the best albums of 1988. Dane and I did an episode of Best Albums. You can check the link right there and check that episode out, which is amazing. Dana talked about being there when Slick Rick was making the album and being friends with him in high school and such. So had Slick Rick and Dougie Fresh done an album basing it off of The Show and Lottie Dottie, 2 of my favorite rap songs of all time, and also 2 of the earliest songs I'd ever heard in rap, because I got my first tape from my friend and The Show was on there. One of my all-time favorite songs, an amazing song. And, you get Dougie Fresh, his storytelling on there. I think he doesn't get enough attention or acclaim for that. But, man, amazing song. And Slick Rick is so charismatic on there as well that it's just a magnificent song. The sound effects Dougie Fresh does with his beatboxing, 6 minutes Dougie Fresh are on. It's just one of the most quoted, most sampled, most remarkable songs in hip-hop history. And had we taken Lottie Dottie, which we see more of lyrically what Slick Rick would be getting into with The Great Adventures of Slick Rick, I'm interested how that influence might have affected what Dougie Fresh did on Oh My God or The World's Greatest Entertainer, how those stories would have melded with what Slick Rick did with The Great Adventures of Slick Rick. And then sonically, Dougie Fresh produced a lot of his early material, as did Slick Rick. So how would their sound have changed? How would it have been similar? Would they have been on Def Jam as Slick Rick was, or would they have been on Reality Dania Records? So a lot of big questions there. And regardless, to go from the show, which was one of, if not the biggest song in 1985, to then, doing an album soon thereafter, I think would have been remarkable. And I think in a lot of ways, it's a shame that didn't happen, because I think that both Dougie Fresh, the world's greatest entertainer, and Slick Rick's The Great Adventures of Slick Rick are two of the best albums from 1988, the best year in rap history. So had Slick Rick and Dougie Fresh collaborated and done something either in 88 or earlier, coming on the heels of the show and Lottie Dottie, I think rap would have been the beneficiary of that. Moving on to something from Tone Clear 1242, he mentioned a list of people, but one that he highlighted was Craig G. And the biggest what if I think of Craig G is, what if he had been on Cold Chill and Warner Brothers like the majority of the rest of the Juice Crew of that era, and at least at that point, all the rest of the members of the Juice Crew that were on the symphony like Craig G. And specifically in that regard, that's Big Daddy Kane, Kool G Rap, and Master Ace. So with Craig G in particular, in 1989, he put out the Kingpin album that was on Atlantic Records. At that point in time, Atlantic didn't really have as much of an imprint, of stronghold, I should say, in rap at the time. They had put out a lot of rap and they were doing decently, but their records and songs didn't have the impact that Biz Markie Going Off had, that Big Daddy Kane, Long Live the Kane had, Master Ace Take a Look Around, or It's a Big Daddy Thing, or Road to the Riches, Kool G Rap. These albums are landmark albums that are some of the more revered, respected, acclaimed, and at the time, best-selling albums that we had in rap, with, Biz Markie doing extremely well, Big Daddy Kane going gold with Long Live the Kane, and with It's a Big Daddy Thing, and of course, Biz Markie with It's Just a Friend going platinum, Diabolical Biz Never Sleeps going gold. So right there, you have a lot of heavyweight stuff going on early with Cold Chillin', and Craig G was siloed over here on Atlantic. And the Kingpin also, I think, is a great album. I've talked to Craig G extensively about the album. You can check out one of my interviews with Craig right here. But the thing with Craig G is the Kingpin, Atlantic had been doing house, had some success with Doug Lazy and others doing house music. House was really big in New York at the time. And, Craig had told me that Atlantic wanted him to do more house stuff. He wasn't really into it. And I thought the Kingpin was great, being from Maryland and going to a lot of clubs in Baltimore at the time as a kid, growing up and stuff. We heard house music. House music's huge in Baltimore, if not the most, at this era, at least the most prominent, dominant form of music. So I liked it. I enjoyed it. And we had seen, even in D.C. with Doug Lazy, house music was big. So it didn't really mean anything to me. And of course, I love the Jungle Brothers, Girl, I'll House You, a lot of Straight Out the Jungle, played off of that a little bit. But regardless, the Craig G angle of it all, how would the album on Cold Chillin' have been different? Would they have little to no house music on it? Would it have been much more hardcore, braggadocio driven, as we saw with the Kool G Raps, the Big Daddy Kanes, the Biz Markies at this time? How would this have changed, if at all? And I do wonder if Craig G had been on Cold Chillin' as well, which seemed to have, basically a bulletproof situation going on with their releases at the time, how Craig G would be viewed differently, how his career would have been changed, a different trajectory he would have seen and experienced. And I thought that was a great one. Another one came from Stephen Greenwood 9253, and his was, what if Arista Records hadn't sideswiped or not done a terrible job seemingly with 3 Times Dope? Now, people who've been watching Unique Access, especially recently, have seen a series of interviews I did with Chuck Nice. There's a link to one of them there. And Chuck Nice is very open and forthright about some of the problems that he had, in particular with Arista Records not knowing what they were doing, and some of the things that, at least according to him, Arista was not doing to promote 3 Times Dope and not doing a good job getting them out there to the public. So that was very disheartening to hear, but in 1990, seeing what happened with Live from Magnificent Land, going from Original Styling, being a phenomenal album, getting all kinds of attention and acclaim, thanks to Greatest Man Alive and Funky Dividends, of course. But then when we get to Live from Magnificent Land, it just seemed like a lot of things had changed with the group, with the sound, the aesthetic. So I was just confused. So had Arista given 3 Times Dope a third album where no longer affiliated with the Hilltop Hustlers, no longer affiliated with Lawrence Goodman, no longer beholden to that kind of potential concern, what would EST, Chuck Nice, and Woody Wood have done on a third album unencumbered and much more savvy business-wise, music-wise, and I think in every single form and fashion. So that's a big thing that I've wondered about many times over the years myself, because EST has gone on to be a songwriter, as I talked for Beyonce, among many others, but then I've also, and Destiny's Child, but as I've talked with Chuck Nice, you know, he also worked with Larry Lair and a whole bunch of other people, Aaliyah, etc. So what would he have been able to use musically, sonically, production-wise, and would he have done like he did with Larry Lair and let Tat Money produce on a 3 Times Dope album? The possibilities are virtually endless. So that was another one. Going on to another crazy what if from Beautiful Noise Hip Hop. What if Prince Rakeem, aka the RZA, would have released his album, his debut album, on Tommy Boy? How would that have affected not only the RZA, but then, as we would see, the ripple effects of what would be Wu-Tang Clan? So does that mean Wu-Tang Clan would have got pushed to the side, would have got delayed because Prince Rakeem, the RZA, would have had some success, or would it have pushed Wu-Tang back because after Ooh, I Love You, Rakeem, they would have put an album out and that would have taken time away from the RZA, so he wouldn't have been able to work on Enter the Wu-Tang, and then to Cal and the series of great albums that we get from the individual Wu-Tang Clan members, starting with Method Man. You know, what would have happened? That's a crazy what if, because had Ooh, I Love You, Rakeem, or Deadly Venoms, or Sexcapades, the 3 songs on that single, if any one of them would have caught on, Deadly Venoms being the closest to what we saw and heard and experienced from Wu-Tang a few years later, of course, if any of those songs had caught on, or the video for Ooh, I Love You, Rakeem would have caught on, then man, you know, who knows would the Wu-Tang have even happened? Would they have just been the crew that came out and like, oh man, I wish we'd hear more from them, and would they have all been signed to Tommy Boy? It just goes on and on and on. It's just a crazy thing to consider. Had RZA been more successful as Prince Rakeem back then. So that was something I thought about too. Pablo Graphics wondered if Dr. Dre and Ice Cube had made Helter Skelter. And this would have been, you know, in 1994, Dr. Dre and Ice Cube combined for Natural Born Killers from the Murder Was the Case soundtrack from Snoop Dogg. That song, that beat, and that video are all, in my opinion, remarkable. Tupac's got a cameo in there. John Amos is in the video. It's wild. And the song is remarkable and later used in the Natural Born Killers movie itself with Woody Harrelson. So, you know, I was really thinking that something was going to be happening with Dre and Cube soon thereafter. And of course, that never materialized. But had we had Ice Cube, who at this point had delivered so much incredible, phenomenal material, but in particular, Death Certificate, had he been able to merge this super political nature with what Dr. Dre was doing, elevated after the Chronic, after Doggy Style, in addition, of course, everything he had done as far as World Class Wrecking Crew and everything he had done with Ruthless Records, that could have been a phenomenal piece of work, because we would have had 2 artists in their prime that had both excelled at the highest level of the game respectively, and would have been able to pour all of that, the best political, the best braggadocio, the best stories from Cube, the best production, the best ideas, the best execution from Dre. Who would have thought? And then how does that affect Cube? Does he focus more on music because of what's going on with this and not necessarily less on film, but just more on music, because of course, other than West Side Connection, and then a little bit later, we didn't get much solo material from Cube in this era, unfortunately. Thankfully for him, you know, his film and television career was exploding, as we see with Friday in 95. But what would have been happening with, you know, Cube? And that to me is a big question, and something that I've thought about many times. Now, on related to Dr. Dre, you know, we have Warren G. What if he had never signed with Def Jam? Now, this is interesting on two levels, because in 94, we had the Regulate song, and then 94 also is Regulate the G-Funk era album. But 1994 Def Jam was not the massive power machine. It had kind of fallen on, I don't want to say hard times, but it certainly wasn't what it was in the late 80s, early 90s, when it was just churning out gold and platinum, and even occasionally multi-platinum records. But Warren G came in and helped sustain the label by having a triple platinum album with Regulate G-Funk era. Anytime a record label was selling more than 3 million copies, that's big business. And that was in 94. That helped kind of bridge the gap as to what was going on to get them to this 98 era that I talked about in What-Ifs Volume 1 with Jay-Z, DMX, and Ja Rule, and then later Ludacris, where the label really had this huge reinvigoration of talent, reinvigoration of sales, and then through that was able to kind of sustain itself and become even more of an iconic label, but then really establish itself as rap's premier label up to that point. So had Warren G signed, as we would have all imagined after hearing him on Ain't No Fun from Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style, had he signed with Death Row and put out a song, or put out Regulate the G-Funk era album on Death Row, how would that have changed not only Death Row, but then Def Jam, and then Warren G? Because Regulate G-Funk era is much smoother. It's not nearly as violent and as profane as what we saw with The Chronic, with Doggy Style, and even with Dog Food. So that would have been very interesting to see how fans, how people, and how his videos would have changed, his songs would have changed, his collaborations would have changed, all that. Would Dr. Dre have produced anything on there? Would Warren have had Snoop Dogg and Nate Dogg all throughout it? Would it have been essentially a 2-1-3 album? All these what ifs, I think, are crazy, and got to give a shout out to Rick Uckland for that one, 3054, for giving me that, because I remember reading about Warren G and some of the stuff that he talked about in The Source, in particular about signing to Death Row and having to talk to Suge as this was happening. So that's definitely a very intriguing thing, had it have happened, and how rap would have changed. And keeping it with Death Row, Byron Davies, shout out to you, because what if Tupac had not joined Death Row Records? This could have been one of the biggest shifts in rap history, especially rap history in the mid and late 1990s, because had he not joined Death Row, you know, Tupac may not have been embroiled in a beef with Biggie. He might not have released Hit 'Em Up. He might not have become the superstar, and he might not have made a lot of the decisions he made subsequently, whether that's songs or diss songs or affiliations or different things that got him into trouble. But creatively, I think it would definitely be different, because he might not have got with Johnny J. He might not have got with Dr. Dre at all. He might not have worked, you know, with the Dog Pound as extensively as he did, or even Snoop Dogg. So all those things, I think, are very intriguing what ifs had Tupac not signed with Death Row. Now, Nick Floria, on a related note, was basically saying, Nick Floria 5435 was basically saying, what if Bad Boy and Death Row didn't have beef? And this is one thing that not only is very intriguing, but on a directly related note, had that happened, would we have seen Biggie and Tupac do a song together, do an album together? Would they have formed a supergroup? Would they have done projects together, producing people, or bringing out artists? All kinds of what ifs that would have happened. And then I would hope and imagine that, of course, they wouldn't have gotten killed and gotten in a rivalry, and each one would still be here with us today, which I think would benefit everyone. But sadly, that's not what happened. But I think that is a huge thing, because then how would, Dr. Dre's relationship with Death Row been affected? How would Snoop Dogg's relationship with Death Row been affected had Bad Boy and Death Row not become rivals? So that one is just mind-blowing and staggering when you just stop to think about it. On a related note, here, this one is from user JL2RE7ZK5Z. Thank you for this one, because it's an interesting one. What if No Limit didn't sign Snoop Dogg? And this one is very, very, very interesting, because had they not, Snoop has talked about this many times. He's talked with me about it. I've talked with Snoop in my book, The History of Gangster Rap. Definitely pick it up if you haven't already. But, Snoop talks about how Master P saved his life. Master P taught him business. Master P gave him all these great things, great opportunities that he didn't have before. So would Snoop have just sat on Death Row Records and not really put out material? Would he have not been able to do all the collaborations that he started doing in this late 1990s, early 2000s era, when he seemed like he was on every single song that was coming out almost, or every single posse cut had a Snoop Dogg on it somehow, some way? Who knows? And that's, to me, what's interesting about this, because had Snoop not been able to get with Master P, would his reach in the South have been as dramatic? Would his view on the world have been the same? Because Master P, according to Snoop, taught him so much about business, about promotion, about doing things. Master P also got Snoop into movies in a way that he hadn't done. Other than, of course, the short film Murder Was the Case when he was on Death Row. But, this, I think, opened Snoop's eyes to the fact that not only was he a major recording artist that could still go double platinum on No Limit, he was an artist that could also be in movies and be a boss and position himself to do these things on bigger and different levels than he had done before, despite Doggy Style in its initial run selling more than 5 million copies. So, we got to think about that one too. And the same user JL2RE also said, what if Eminem had signed with one of the early people that were interested in signing him, and in particular, Fat Joe's Terror Squad or Duck Down Records? Now, either one of those would have been intriguing on many levels, because Duck Down, I've interviewed Buckshot, I've interviewed General Steel, I've interviewed Rock Nest Monster, Starang Wonder. I love Duck Down. They also had never had somebody that is like Eminem, that had the backpack battle rapper that then became a superstar. So would that have been able to be something that Duck Down would have been able to facilitate, getting him on the radio and getting him on the videos in the way that we saw Interscope do, and of course, Dr. Dre? On the flip side of that, Fat Joe showed that with Big Pun, he was able to take an artist that was super lyrically potent and get him to a platinum status, and do it with hit records, and do it with supreme lyrical dexterity, and do it in an unconventional artist, in the sense of Big Pun obviously being overweight and obese, and using that as a marketing tool as a plus. Would Fat Joe have been able to spin Eminem in the same way, using his whiteness as a plus? That, is an interesting what if, because of course Interscope, Aftermath, and the team over there was able to, walk that line of Eminem being a white rapper who's phenomenally talented and also making incredible, credible rap music. So would Duck Down, would Fat Joe have been able to do that? We'll never know. But both would have been interesting, and both would have, I imagined, I imagine would have presented him in drastically different ways, which is also drastically different than Eminem was presented with Dr. Dre, Aftermath, and Interscope. So all these what ifs, man, I'm glad that my part one resonated with people so much and that I was able to highlight some of the more interesting ones I thought that I got in the comment section here for part two of what ifs on the 1st and 15th. So as we did last time, hit me in the comment section because I'd love to hear what you guys think of the ones that I highlighted and any other ones that you'd want me to discuss, because some people were talking about I should do a series of these, so at least there'll be 2 at the minimum. But if there's some what ifs you'd like me to see to discuss in section 3, if we do one, let me know. And then, of course, if you haven't already, please, please, please subscribe to Unique Access Entertainment. Spread the word on our channel. We're growing and we're hoping and aiming to get to that #1 spot in the game. And the only way we're going to get there is through your help. So please subscribe. Please like our content. Please share it. And to get 1st and 15th before anyone else, join as a member to Unique Access Entertainment. Right there on that button, there are 3 tiers you can join. Any of them would be tremendous, and we appreciate your support in getting us this far. I'm Soren Baker. Thanks for watching me on the 1st and 15th here on Unique Access Entertainment.